Today, my friends, I want to settle a question that has captivated humanity for centuries, if not millennia. How to make the perfect crouton. I might be overplaying this just a little bit. Today, I want to find out how we can make a crouton so good you'll want to eat it by the handful. And we're going to determine the answer in 3 rounds. First, what's the perfect crouton bread? Second, what's the perfect crouton rebaking method? And third, what's the perfect crouton seasoning? As you can see, I did a little bit of prepping, so let's jump straight to round number 1 and I introduce these contenders to you. So candidate number 1 is going to be this rustic French style country loaf. I would describe it as very rustic. It has a really thick and beautiful crust, which is going to be great in a lot of scenarios, but maybe not necessarily if you're going to turn this into a crouton. So we'll see. This smells really amazing. Why? Because this is a sourdough bread, but also this has some rye flour mixed into it. So this is not 100% wheat. This is actually a beautiful loaf of bread. Delicious. I would love to make a sandwich with this, but that's not what we're here for. This is a ciabatta loaf. I think it's pretty safe to also call this one rustic. The crust is pretty substantial, but definitely not quite as thick. This is 100% wheat flour, so no rye or any of that. And also, this is a yeasted dough, so not a sourdough. It tastes really nice, but there are more. So this guy, you probably recognize it, is a pretzel style bread, which basically means this bread has been dipped into a lye solution before baking, which results in this beautiful brown crust that also smells really nice and has that classic pretzel flavor to it. With this bread, you can immediately tell the crumb is super dense, but yet this pretzel style bread feels really, really light. Let's give this a quick taste. What can I say? I love pretzel style bread. It is really, really soft. And then of course, it's just the pretzel flavor. It's just so good. But, there is one last contender. I'm pretty sure this bread needs no introduction, does it? This, of course, is good old white sandwich bread. The whitest bread of all time. This bread is kind of dense and has a super hyper regular crumb, which is almost a little bit creepy. And it is, of course, extremely soft. And the crust, the crust is there, but it's very, very thin and delicate. And unless you're a 5-year-old or an 85-year-old, it's basically almost not noticeable. This definitely has the least taste out of all the breads we tried, but that's okay. With all the contenders introduced, let me tell you what the plan is. French sourdough country loaf, ciabatta, pretzel, and American sandwich bread. I'm gonna take a few croutons out of each tub whatsoever. No salt, no oil, no nothing. And here we are. Some wonderful and delicious croutons for me to taste. You can already see there are pretty major differences just by looking at them. Crouton number 1, French sourdough. Let me try another one. Oh, a little bit dry, hold on. Flavor-wise, this crouton is incredible. It's like toasty and nutty and complex. It's really, really good. Texturally, well, that's a complicated question because the crumb is quite open, you still actually get a good amount of crunch without it being too firm. But, can you see how much crust there is? It's actually quite a lot, and this crust is very hard. This is only the 4th of these croutons that I'm eating and it already scratched the roof of my mouth. Does that mean these croutons are bad? No, that's definitely not what it means. If you're making a soup and you're putting a few of these very, very sturdy croutons into soup, that's actually amazing because they will be able to hold up against the moisture of the soup for quite a while before they get super soggy. Variety number 2, the ciabatta crouton. This crouton took on a lot of color. That's a shatteringly crisp crouton. I'm gonna do one more. Oh, in terms of flavor, this just tastes like nicely toasted white bread. Texturally though, this is kind of amazing. Because of the super open crumb, as soon as you bite into it, it kind of collapses in itself like a house of cards. And that makes for a very satisfying experience. There is a downside though. But first let's move on to the next crouton, which is gonna be the pretzel crouton, which I have pretty high expectations for. This is what it looks like. It browned quite nicely, I would say, but not as even as the others. Okay. It is not as shatteringly crisp as the first two. It still maintained most of this classic pretzel taste. And texturally, this one surprisingly gives me a little bit more to chew on. I would definitely say that if you're looking to make snackable croutons, this bread is amazing for that type of crouton. Last but not least, the sandwich bread crouton. Oh, it's so weird. This one has a nice, like, buttery flavor. It is made with butter, so that is a plus. It is also completely safe to consume when it comes to the roof of your mouth. And since this type of bread is almost designed to be toasted, unsurprisingly, it toasts up quite flavorfully. The texture of this crouton is kind of ridiculous. I mean, check it out. Like, that's what happens in your mouth when you eat it. It literally just turns to dust, like that. There is one thing that this type of bread definitely has going for itself, and that is its shape. The other three types of bread were kind of round and slightly oddly shaped, and that actually makes it really, really hard to cut out equal pieces with not a ton of crust. But with the sandwich bread, that's very easy. I must be some kind of genius since I figured out that that's what you come to this channel for, isn't it? So here's a little plot twist for you. There is a bread number 5. I got this bread this morning, but I actually decided not to include it in the main test because I thought it was not distinct enough. It was kind of like in between all of the varieties we already tasted, and I thought that wouldn't be good for the video. But now I'm realizing this bread might actually be exactly what we need. Let me show you why. So this is a regular ass white yeasted bread. Shape, it's a square loaf. I would say it has a medium open crumb and it's otherwise completely unremarkable. So far this bread is doing pretty well. And now the question is, how do we roast them? Let me explain. The whole first batch we basically just dry roasted, no additions whatsoever. But for this batch, I'm gonna use the same type of crouton, only that we're gonna roast a few of them completely unseasoned, just like we did before, as a control. We're gonna roast some of them with olive oil, some of them with butter, and some of them with lard. Which one does the best? Alright, as we're getting closer to the finish line, my croutons seem to get tastier and tastier. Crouton number 1, our control crouton. Basically, we're testing if this new type of bread is actually as good as I was hoping. I can tell you, yes. Not too crusty, but also not too dusty. I feel like it could work in a soup as well as in a salad, as well as a snack. But while the experience is still fresh in my mind, let me try one that I tossed in olive oil. It definitely did, because it toasts up more evenly. That's important. But also, it just makes the crouton less dry. So with olive oil, somewhat surprisingly, the flavor didn't change that much, but the texture drastically improved. So yeah, don't dry roast your croutons. But now let's compare that to a butter roasted crouton. Once again, it looks pretty much the same. Oh yeah. I'm getting a good bit of butter flavor. It's good. It's almost too much butter flavor. Let me try a second one. It almost gives me croissant vibes, you know, with all the butteriness and crispiness. But, we still have one more to try, and that is a crouton tossed in lard. This is what that looks like. Oh my God. Wow. Kinda good, but also definitely too much. But you know what? Okay, we actually don't have a clear winner, and yet I'm pretty sure I know what to do. I'll share that in a second, but also the final touch is still missing. The thing that is supposed to make our croutons truly irresistible. I am of course talking about the seasoning. So join me for the grand finale of this video. I found that the butter gave our croutons a lovely, well, buttery note, but it was a little bit overpowering. This olive oil, on the other hand, gave our croutons a nice and light crunch, but lacked a little bit of flavor. So, obviously, think you know where this is going. We're gonna take some of our butter and simply mix it with some olive oil. This should give us the best of both worlds. Speaking of which, guess what we're gonna add for a little bit of sharpness? That's right, some minced garlic. Simply add that to your fat. Garlic will obviously give us a little bit of a pungent hit, but we're also gonna add a couple of chopped herbs. Which herbs are... Which herbs am I using, you might be asking? Thank you. Well, I'm using a bit of rosemary, thyme, oregano, and sage. Let's just mix those into our oil. Look at this goodness. And then to that, we're simply gonna add all of our croutons. Give everything a good mix. These look kind of amazing and they smell even better. We're gonna put them in the oven, 180 Celsius once again, but this time, not for the full 10 minutes. Instead, we're only gonna bake them about 80% of the way, so 8 minutes or so. See you in a second. Okay, look at these. These are what I'm gonna call dark blonde. As in, not quite done yet, but well on their way. Which just so happens to be the perfect time for our next step. What we did before baking could be considered pre-seasoning. We added garlic and herbs to the oil. But now we're gonna do what I call midpoint seasoning. And we're gonna be seasoning the croutons with some shredded Parmesan cheese, some grated Parmesan cheese. And a little extra parm on top for good measure. I wish the parm stuck better to the croutons. Most of it is just in the tray, but yeah. Anyway, if you know how to fix that, let me know. Back into the oven you go. Okay, here we are, another 5 minutes or so later. This took like 13, 14 minutes in total, so a bit longer than the ones before. And here's an important pro tip. When you get your croutons out of the oven, let them like steam off a little bit. Naturally release their own moisture, which is what they're doing right now as I'm yapping into the camera for you. I kind of hate to wait right now. So when is the time to use post-bake seasoning? Well, for spices that would otherwise just burn. Like, trying to dramatically open, but I can't. Like this smoked paprika. In case you didn't know, paprika is like notorious for burning very, very, very quickly. So I love to add it towards the end or whenever it doesn't have a chance to burn. Oh, smoked paprika is intense, but it makes a lot of things very tasty. And there you have it. The andong crouton. A crouton that is supposedly so good, you just want to snack it by itself. But is it? Only one way to find out, and trust me, it's not easy to judge the quality of a crouton after you've been making crouton for pretty much an entire day. Anyway, cheers. Yeah. Ah, I love it. Listen guys, this is what I call success. Look at it, you can tell it's crispy, can't you? Oh. The bread we used has the perfect density and the perfect shape to be cut into croutons and baked. Tossing them in a mixture of olive oil and melted butter is honestly perfect because it gives it that light crunch, but it's not overly buttery. It's not like, it doesn't feel like cake. Also, these resulting croutons would work in a salad, they would work in a soup, and as you can tell, I cannot stop snacking on these croutons, and who knows, this could be you.